The auction yard stank of mud, diesel, and desperation. A cold wind sliced through the crowd, tugging at frayed sleeves and battered hats. Most came to see the strong stock, shiny coats, square builds, muscle underskin. No one looked twice at the pen in the far corner. No one except her. Claire Dawson stood there, hands buried in the pockets of a worn-out canvas coat. Her eyes were fixed on the scrawny bay mare in the shadows. The horse's coat was rough, its ribs showed plainly, and one eye drooped as if sleep had never been kind to her. She looked too young to be that broken, or maybe she'd just known more cruelty than most. They'll probably send her to the meat truck, a man muttered nearby, shaking his head. Claire didn't flinch. She'd heard the words before. She had lived them in another way. A year ago, she had been standing in a courtroom instead of a corral. Divorce finalized, house sold, veterinary clinic closed, all of it gone. Her father's old ranch, her mother's piano, the dogs gone. It took her 30 seconds to lose everything she'd spent 30 years building. But this wasn't about her. The auctioneer's voice barked through the loudspeaker, dragging her back to the present. The mare's lot was next. The man beside Claire gave a low chuckle. $1 special, maybe, he said. That's all that bag of bones is worth. Claire stepped forward before the words even fully left his mouth. $1, she said, her voice cutting through the crowd like a snapped rope. The crowd stilled. Someone scoffed. The auctioneer hesitated, squinting toward her, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Claire raised her hand higher. $1, she repeated. Cash. The gavel came down with a dull thud. The yard moved on. The next horse was led out bigger, stronger, more spirited. But Claire's gaze didn't waver from the bay mare. As a wrangler unlatched the pen, the mare didn't move. Not even an ear twitch. She stood there as if she were already part of the dirt. Got yourself a real prize, the wrangler muttered, handing over the frayed lead rope. Probably hasn't been touched in months. Claire didn't respond. She approached slowly, cautiously. Not because she feared a kick. She could still take a bruise. But because the mare looked like she might shatter if someone moved too fast. I'm not going to hurt you, Claire whispered, more breath than sound. The mare blinked. Claire crouched, holding the rope, but not pulling. Her knees creaked from cold and time. Her voice softened again. You and me, we're both tired of being looked through, huh? The mare took a single step forward. Not a trust fall. Not a surrender. Just enough. It took nearly an hour to coax her into the trailer. Claire didn't rush. She didn't speak unless the mare looked at her. No carrots. No tricks. Just presence. Back on the road, the wind howled harder. The heater in the truck rattled like it might give up. Claire kept one hand on the wheel, one eye on the rearview mirror, where the mare stood silent in the trailer, still and watching. She didn't have a barn anymore, not really. Just the back half of what used to be her father's equipment shed. It had been patched with tarps and plywood last spring when she first came back. The land was hers now, what was left of it. 10 acres of frostbitten weeds, a crooked fence, and silence. But it was something. Claire backed the trailer toward the gate, headlights sweeping across frost-glazed grass. The mare didn't resist when the ramp dropped. She walked out slowly, head low, every step measured like it might be her last. Claire led her into the stall, 4 walls and some straw, a single water bucket. The mare sniffed the air once, then turned her back toward the wall and stood like a statue. I guess you've had people let you down too, Claire said, setting down a flake of hay in the corner. The mare didn't move. For days, she didn't eat unless Claire left the stall. She didn't respond to touch. She didn't react to the other horses across the fence line. But Claire kept showing up. Morning and evening. A few words. A fresh bucket. Sometimes just silence. It wasn't about taming. It was about waiting. On the 4th day, something changed. It happened in the half-light of dawn, when mist clung low to the ground and the world was quiet. Claire stepped into the stall with a scoop of grain, and the mare slowly turned her head. It wasn't much. Just an acknowledgement. But Claire felt it like a wave. She didn't smile. Not yet. But something warm stirred in her chest. She named her Hope that morning. It wasn't clever. It wasn't even original. But it felt true. Hope flinched the first time Claire tried to touch her neck. Not violently, just a shiver, a ghost of memory. Claire pulled back and waited. That night, Hope stepped forward on her own, nostrils flaring, neck stiff. But she let Claire lay a hand against her withers. She didn't bolt. She'll never ride, a neighbor said when he stopped by with hay later that week. Probably has something twisted up inside, mind or bone, can't say. She's not worth the effort. Claire didn't argue. She'd heard the same thing about herself after the divorce. You're not the same anymore, they'd said. Why don't you just start over somewhere else? But starting over didn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it meant remembering the things worth saving. Every evening, Claire sat near Hope's stall with a thermos of coffee. She read old veterinary textbooks. She hummed old songs her mother used to play on the piano. Sometimes she just listened, to the wind in the trees, to Hope's breath rising and falling, to the quiet thump of hooves shifting in straw. One night, just after the first snow dusted the roof, Hope walked toward her without being called. She pressed her muzzle against Claire's shoulder and stood there, still and solid. Claire closed her eyes. "You're still in there," she whispered. "I knew you were." Outside, the wind had calmed. The world had paused for just a moment, and somewhere deep inside that quiet, something began to mend. The winter deepened, and with it came a new rhythm, slow, deliberate, and quietly relentless. Claire moved through the days, with practiced patience, letting Hope set the pace. There were no sudden breakthroughs, no miraculous gallops across open fields. Just small, steady signs that the mare was beginning to live again. Hope started meeting Claire at the stall door each morning, ears pricked forward, nostrils twitching with anticipation. She took to following Claire around the paddock, cautious but curious, her steps lighter, her gaze steadier. When the wind blew too hard or a distant truck backfired, she'd still spook, trembling from head to hoof. But now she recovered quicker. Now she looked to Claire. It was during one of those quiet mornings that the man in the green Dodge pulled into the drive. Claire watched the truck roll to a stop beside the barn, kicking up dust despite the frozen ground. She knew that truck. Everyone in the county did. Levi Hart stepped out with the easy confidence of a man who'd never lost much. Tall, lean, sharp-eyed. He ran Hart Ranch, one of the biggest operations in the valley. Money, horses, reputation. Claire had treated his animals years ago, before everything fell apart. She'd always found him careful with words, the kind of man who measured silence before speaking. He raised a gloved hand. "Heard you picked up a project horse." Claire nodded. "Word gets around." Levi glanced toward the paddock, where Hope stood beneath the bare-limbed oak. Her coat had begun to thicken, the dullness fading just a little. She watched the stranger with wariness, but didn't bolt. "She yours now." Claire looked toward the mare. "She is. I've got a client looking for rescues. Wants to sponsor a few rehab cases. Therapy horses, maybe. He's not picky about bloodlines, but the horse has to be stable, trainable." Claire's jaw tightened. "She's not for sale." Levi didn't look surprised. Didn't think she was. "But I figured you should know there are eyes on what you're doing. Some folks think you're wasting your time." Claire's lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. "Those folks can keep their opinions." He chuckled once. "Same Claire Dawson I remember." She didn't reply. She waited until his truck disappeared down the road before turning back to Hope, who now stood at the gate, watching her. There was something in the mare's eyes, recognition maybe, or just the absence of fear. That night, Claire brought out the saddle pad. She didn't intend to ride. Not yet. It was just another layer of trust, another test of memory versus present. Hope flinched at the sight of it, nostrils flaring wide. But she didn't back away. Claire spoke softly, describing every move, lifting the pad, approaching slowly, laying it gently across Hope's back. The mare stood still. Claire stepped away, giving her space. "That's enough for today." But Hope took a step forward. Then another. Claire didn't move. Hope closed the gap between them and lowered her head, exhaling against Claire's chest. It was the first time Claire allowed herself to cry. Not the deep, heaving sobs of despair, but something quieter. A release. Hope didn't flinch. She stood there, a steady presence, as if the roles had reversed and she was now the one offering comfort. Days turned into weeks. By mid-February, Claire had Hope walking in circles on a lunge line. The mare's gait was uneven, her right hind leg stiff on colder days, but there was progress. She listened to voice cues, followed direction, and responded to pressure and release like she remembered what it all meant. One morning, Claire saddled her. Hope shuddered at the cinch but didn't panic. Claire ran a hand along her neck, murmuring reassurance. She led her to the mounting block, but didn't climb aboard. Not yet. Just placed a boot in the stirrup and leaned in. Hope didn't move. Claire stepped down, patting her side. "We'll get there." That same afternoon, the call came. She was in the tack shed when the phone buzzed, unknown number. She answered, expecting spam or a wrong number. "Claire Dawson." "Yes. This is Judge Carolyn Evers. I was given your name by Levi Hart." Claire straightened. "Judge, I'm overseeing a new county program, court-appointed equine rehabilitation for at-risk youth. I'm told you've made progress with a difficult case." Claire stayed silent, unsure what she was being pulled into. "I'd like to visit your property," the judge continued. "See your work. If what I've heard is true, you might be the right person to partner with." Claire gripped the phone tighter. "With respect, ma'am, I'm not sure I'm looking for that kind of attention." "I understand, but I think your story could help more than just horses." The line went quiet. Claire's thoughts tangled. She looked out the shed window at Hope, who was now trotting on her own in the paddock, tail raised, ears alert. There was life in her again. Motion. "I'll think about it," Claire said. She ended the call and stepped outside, her breath visible in the sharp air. Hope turned toward her immediately and walked to the fence, the soft snort of greeting now familiar. Claire leaned on the rail. "They want to make us an example." Hope blinked slowly. "I'm not sure I'm ready." The mare pressed her head over the fence, bumping against Claire's shoulder like she understood. That night, Claire sat by the fire with her father's old journal in her lap. He'd written about horses like people, full of stories, layered with scars. She traced a line he'd underlined once. "The ones who survive the worst are the ones who know how to carry more than just weight." Outside, the wind picked up again, howling across the fields. Claire closed the journal and looked toward the barn. Hope was still standing, even after everything. So was she. And for the first time in a long while, Claire didn't feel alone. Spring arrived gently, softening the edges of the world and coaxing green from the thawing ground. Hope's coat gleamed now, shedding winter's dullness for a coppery sheen. Her eyes no longer darted in fear at the rustle of leaves or distant engine hum. She had begun to trust the world again, or, at least, the small corner of it Claire offered her. Claire opened the paddock gate one morning, saddle in hand, and Hope walked to her without hesitation. There was still caution in her steps, but not dread. Claire tacked her up slowly, speaking in a low, steady tone, her movements careful and deliberate. When she placed a boot in the stirrup and swung herself lightly into the saddle, Hope flinched, but did not bolt. Claire sat still, letting the mare adjust to her weight, her presence. The air was quiet except for the soft creak of leather and the wind brushing through new leaves. Hope shifted beneath her, but remained grounded. Claire touched the reins gently. "Let's just walk." And they did, slow, uneven steps around the edge of the paddock, Claire balancing her weight carefully, hands light on the reins. Hope moved like a memory stirring awake, her body recalling what her mind had tried to forget. For 15 minutes they walked, and not once did she try to throw Claire. When she dismounted, Claire wrapped her arms around the mare's neck and whispered, "You did it." Hope snorted and pawed the ground, a flicker of pride in her posture. Later that day, Judge Evers returned. This time she brought a young girl with her, tall, thin, and guarded, with 2 big sleeves hiding trembling hands. The girl's name was Eliza, 15, foster care veteran, arrested twice for assault, once for theft. Claire had reservations. Hope wasn't a therapy horse. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But Evers had seen something in Eliza. Something fractured but unyielding. "She doesn't talk to people," the judge said, "but I've seen her with dogs. She listens to animals." Claire studied Eliza from a distance. The girl kept her hood up, eyes down. Hope watched her from the paddock, curious, but cautious. "If the horse spooks, you take her out of here," Claire said firmly. "One wrong trigger, and we lose everything we've built." Evers nodded and stepped back. Claire approached Eliza gently. "You ever been near a horse before?" The girl shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "This one's not like the others. She's been through hell." That caught Eliza's attention. Her gaze lifted slightly, enough to glance at Hope. "You can stand outside the fence," Claire said. "Just watch. No pressure." Eliza stepped forward slowly, hands buried in her sleeves. She stood at the rail, silent. Hope approached cautiously, ears flicking, head low. A few feet away, she stopped, nostrils flaring. Claire held her breath. Eliza didn't move. She just watched. And then, almost imperceptibly, she extended her hand through the slats of the fence. Hope stepped forward and touched it. Neither of them moved after that, as if both had found a place where they didn't have to. From then on, Eliza came every morning. She didn't speak to Claire much, but she spoke to Hope, in a language only the broken understood, silent, steady presence. She brushed her with long strokes, careful not to rush, led her on short walks through the pasture, read her books, sitting cross-legged by the fence, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire watched from the porch, unsure whether she was witnessing a miracle or simply the slow alchemy of patience and pain shared. Weeks passed. Eliza laughed once, just once, when Hope snorted into her hoodie and nibbled the drawstring. Claire heard it from the tack room and froze. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to someone who'd stopped believing in joy. That same week, Levi Hart returned. He leaned on the fence beside Claire, watching Eliza lead Hope in slow circles. "Wasn't sure you'd take her in," he said. "She didn't come for me. She came for Hope." "She's doing good," he said, nodding toward the mare. "She is," Claire replied. "So is the horse." Levi chuckled. "There's a benefit auction next month. Therapy horses, rehab programs, that sort of thing. Judge Evers wants you to bring Hope and Eliza. Show what's possible." Claire hesitated. "We're not a showcase." "I know, but maybe someone out there needs to see what happens when you don't give up." Claire looked toward the girl and the horse, two beings who'd been left behind, now walking together like they'd always belonged. "I'll think about it," she said. The night before the auction, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof of the barn. Wind shrieked through the rafters. Claire paced the aisle, while Hope stood in her stall, uneasy, eyes wide. Lightning cracked. The mare shivered. Eliza didn't hesitate. She stepped into the stall, sat down in the straw, and pulled her knees to her chest. Hope moved toward her slowly, and Eliza raised her face. "I'm scared too," she said, barely audible. Hope rested her head over the girl's shoulder. When morning came, the storm had passed, and so had something else. A weight lifted, invisible but real. At the auction, Claire kept to the background. She hated crowds, hated the feeling of being measured. But Eliza stood tall beside Hope, one hand on the lead rope, the other resting lightly on the mare's neck. People murmured as they walked the circle. "That's the rescue from last fall." "No way that's the same horse." "Who trained that kid?" Claire said nothing. She just watched. When it came time for testimony, Eliza took the mic. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "They said I was dangerous," she began. "They said I couldn't change. But nobody asked why I was angry. Nobody asked what I'd lost." She looked at Hope. She didn't ask either. She just stayed. Silence filled the barn. Claire felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. Eliza's hands didn't shake anymore. Hope stood beside her like a guardian. Claire understood then that the central conflict had never been just Hope's trauma or Eliza's pain. It was about whether healing was possible when both parties were too scarred to reach first. And now, somehow, they had reached together. After the auction, Levi approached again. "What you did here that matters." Claire shook her head. "I didn't do anything. They saved each other." He nodded. "Still, someone had to give them the chance." Claire walked back to the paddock alone. Hope stood in the sunlight, tail flicking lazily, eyes half closed. Claire reached out, stroking her muzzle. "You're not broken," she whispered. You never were. And for the first time since she found the mare trembling in that trailer, she believed it. Autumn swept in with gold-tipped winds and cooler evenings, painting the farm in fading light. The leaves crackled underfoot as Eliza walked the fence line beside Hope, the mare's hooves crunching gently in rhythm. They had grown into something more than a pair. They were a unit now, each attuned to the other's silences, each carrying the weight of old wounds with a quieter kind of strength. Claire watched from the barn doorway, arms folded, her eyes thoughtful. Eliza had begun talking more, slow, deliberate words, mostly about Hope, sometimes about the other foster homes, the group shelters, the empty holidays. It was never easy, but it was honest. One morning, Claire handed her a faded photo. In it, a younger Claire stood beside a dark bay mare, one arm slung around the horse's neck, both of them smiling. Her name was Marla, Claire said. My first. She kept me from falling apart more times than I can count. Eliza held the photo carefully, her thumb brushing the edges. She die? She asked after a pause. Claire nodded. Old age. But she's the reason I started all this. Eliza looked back toward Hope. You think she knows? Claire smiled. I think they remember everything that matters. Word spread slowly about what was happening at the farm. First came the calls, parents asking if their troubled son could visit, teachers wondering if a weekend volunteer slot might help a withdrawn student. Then a reporter showed up, quiet and curious. Claire almost turned him away, but Eliza insisted. Maybe there's someone like me out there, she said. Someone who needs to know they're not the only one. So the article ran in the local paper. Asterisk, the broken horse, and the girl who wouldn't give up. Asterisk, it didn't go viral, but it spread far enough. Soon after, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Neat cursive. Claire read it aloud in the kitchen. To whom it may concern. I was the original owner of the chestnut mare you call Hope. Her name was Firefly. I raised her from a foal. She was never supposed to end up where she did. I lost her in a divorce settlement, and then I lost track. I've carried that guilt for years. Asterisk, asterisk. If you're willing, I would like to visit. Not to take her back, just to see her. And thank you. Asterisk, asterisk. David Thomas. Eliza froze, a fork halfway to her mouth. He wants to take her. Claire shook her head. No, just visit. Eliza looked down, jaw clenched. What if she remembers him? She might, Claire said. But that doesn't erase what you've done for her. A week later, David arrived. Late 50s, weathered face, cautious eyes. He walked with the posture of a man who had learned to brace for rejection. Hope was grazing under the cottonwood tree. When she saw him, she lifted her head but didn't move. David didn't approach right away. He stood by the fence, hat in hand. She used to come when I whistled, he said softly. Claire said nothing. Eliza stood a few paces back, arms crossed. David whistled, a clear, low note. Hope flicked an ear but remained still. She remembers, he said with a bittersweet smile. But she doesn't come. Claire stepped aside. You can go to her. Just slow. David climbed through the fence and walked to Hope, one step at a time. When he reached her, she sniffed his coat, then lowered her head. He stroked her gently. I'm sorry, he murmured. I should have fought harder. Eliza watched them, stiff and unreadable. David turned, eyes meeting hers. She's beautiful. You've taken care of her. I didn't do it for you, Eliza said, voice hard. I know, he replied. But thank you anyway. That night, Hope stood at the window of Eliza's room, head framed by the moonlight. The girl climbed out of bed, crossed the grass in her socks, and leaned against the mare's shoulder. You didn't go with him, she whispered. Hope nuzzled her sleeve. Eliza pressed her forehead to the horse's neck and closed her eyes. I wouldn't have blamed you. A few days later, Claire received another letter. This time, it wasn't a visit. It was an offer. A woman named Margaret Holt ran a therapeutic riding center 3 counties over. She had read the article, spoken with Judge Evers, and wanted to create a scholarship in Eliza's name for at-risk teens who'd been through the juvenile system. Claire handed the letter to Eliza. She wants you to come speak. Share your story. Maybe work there someday. I'm not a speaker. Eliza said, shrinking into herself. You weren't a horse girl either, Claire replied. Now look. Eliza didn't answer immediately. She stared at Hope through the window, her face unreadable. Would I have to leave here? Eventually, Claire said. Maybe not yet, but someday. Hope let out a soft snort from her stall. Eliza nodded slowly. Someday then. A month passed. Then two. Eliza began helping other kids when they came to the farm. She didn't talk much, but she showed them how to hold the brush, how to let the horse set the pace, how to be still. And that was enough. One afternoon, a boy about 10 years old burst into tears after a pony refused to come near him. He dropped the rope and backed away. They hate me, he said, sobbing. Eliza knelt beside him. They don't hate you, she said. You're just loud. You're scared. They get scared too. She handed him the rope again. Try being quiet for a minute. Let her decide. Claire watched from the shadows, heart tight. Later, as dusk settled over the fields, Eliza sat with Hope under the same cottonwood tree where she'd first earned the mare's trust. I used to think I was like a broken window, she said. No use unless someone fixed me. But maybe I'm more like a gate. A little rusty, maybe stuck sometimes. But I still open. Hope flicked an ear. You help me open. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of apples and warm hay. Claire stood nearby, but didn't intrude. She knew this wasn't her moment to share. It belonged to the girl who had once said nothing, and the horse who had once trusted no one. They were whole now. Not perfect, but whole. And for the first time, the future didn't look like a question. It looked like a path. One they could walk together, wherever it led.